Ready, set, art. Dealing with shiny cars, right? And it's actually not that difficult. It's almost even more abstract, if anything, and it should remind you of when drawing a balloon, how to deal with highlights and shadows. Similar, there's more line work involved, and there's more reflections involved with it. Attached in Google Classroom, you will see this photo. I did increase the contrast in it so it was easier to see dark areas and light areas. I'm not drawing the whole thing. We're essentially zooming in on a part of it. Okay? So when I did this, I kind of just drew a square on this paper, and then I drew part of this. And if you look at it, did I add more highlights in? Yes. So I did change some of it so that it'd have stronger contrast within the piece, and artists do that all the time. And when you move on to your final piece where you're doing cars and movement, you're probably going to exaggerate the highlights as well in order for it to stand out so it doesn't come across as too gray or one color, right? So anyways, I'm going to focus on this part, and then that helps you to figure out everything else. So I'm going to go ahead and put this there. I'm going to move my drawing to here. And then what I have here is my regular number 2 pencil. I have a mechanical pencil in case I need it. I didn't use it for the drawing though. And then I have a nice dry paintbrush. I like that for smudging. And my big eraser, which is also good for smudging. Okay. I don't like smudging with my finger because there's oils in my finger. And when that oil attaches to the paper, along with the clay that's within the graphite, because number 2 pencils, this is a mixture of graphite and clay. So when that oil mixes with the graphite on the paper, it becomes like mud, and it eventually almost turns like a yellow, and it ends up looking kind of dirty. So you don't want to ever smudge your fingers. Sometimes people like to use those stumps, or a Q-tip, or a paper towel, or a Kleenex. I have a tendency to think that those over smudge a piece. They overdo it. You want to have some texture in there, because if it overall has too flat of a look, all that effort you put into doing highlights and shadowing and making it look three-dimensional just kind of goes away if you over smudge it. So the nice thing about a paintbrush, because of the bristles and the spaces in between the bristles, is that it's going to smudge it, but it's not going to over smudge it. And then eraser helps with bigger areas, but without making it look dirty. So that's why I prefer to use that. I know that some people really love stumps. I'm just not into it. I think it has a tendency to over smudge a piece. Okay, getting started. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of create this square. Why? Because I'm really just focusing on one area. Now I'm drawing it darker than I normally would. Why? So that you can see it. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw this part, which is kind of like the cover to the wheel. The cover to the wheel, right? And again, I'm trying to draw darker than I normally would. Okay. And then from here, I section off where the highlights are, just like when doing a balloon drawing. So I know there's a highlight over here, so I leave that alone. And then I kind of do the streaking, but I'm curving it because this is curved. I wouldn't make it straight because the piece itself is not straight. So I kind of shape my highlight with it. There's another highlight section here and one over here. Alright, so now I've sectioned it off so that I don't shade too much into it, because if you press too dark here and you try to erase, it might not be able to get back to the white paper that you had. I mean, if you sketch over it lightly and you make a mistake and you erase, of course it should be able to come out. But, you know, when shading, and you know that there's some highlight areas, you're going to want to section off the areas that are highlighted. Alright, so what I'm doing is I'm just shading. And if it goes outside your square, it's not a big deal because we're learning. We're learning, right? It's a sketchbook assignment. Okay, there's some shading here. There was a little bit here. Okay. As you can imagine, for a demonstration, drawing the whole square in would take very long. So I'm just really focusing on one section, and then you'll have to figure out the other areas. Alright, so now I have that part in. I'm going to show the two different smudging areas, so I'm going to go ahead and use my eraser. And I kind of work in a circular motion, gently on top. I don't press too hard. I'm just kind of gracing that top, and it's allowing it to smudge a little bit. And almost lightening it up too. Because one of the things is when you're trying to create light values with a number 2 pencil, and you go to shade, naturally it comes out that dark, right? And on a scale of 1 to 6, that would be a 3. So if you go back over it, just like this, now you have a value of like a 1.5, right? So that's the benefit of trying to get a lighter value out of your pencil, because automatically it comes out to that darker 3, and we're not quite ready for that. We need to build our values. So this helps to kind of smudge it up a little bit. Alright, so now it's starting to get that value range that we need. Alright, so then when I looked at the piece, there's some areas that are darker than others, like right here was darker. So I'm going to fade this in to that light value that I just created. I also noticed how dark it was over here. So I fade that in slowly into my 1.5 value. See how we're layering? It's a layering technique that we have to do. And maybe even lighter right here. So we're going to keep some areas white, but some areas are dark. There were some very dark areas right here. It was kind of like in the middle, basically. It was not too dark. Keep going. See, we're starting to get there. It's starting to create this kind of streaky look. And then I'm going to use my paintbrush. And I'm kind of just gently putting my value, moving that around. See, it's kind of doing a light smudge, but not overkill. The stumps can sometimes stain the paper by accident. So I went over a little bit too much right there, so I'm just going to, okay. Now I can put even darker lines going in compared to before. See, now it's starting to clean up a little bit. You can see everything, you just got to take your time. Press a little hard with that pencil, and if it's not sharp enough, go and sharpen it. See, I'm adding a few more lines now as I go in. So this is what I mean by kind of abstract, because as you're doing this, as an artist, you're naturally going to change the way the highlights are, because look at the original, right? Creating all of those reflections of the clouds that are from above are going to be a little challenge, so you're probably going to change it a little bit, and that's okay. Alright, so now we have the basics in. I'm going to put this light outline right there. And look, I kept a little white space right there. And then I'm going to go very dark, because this is right before the tire. And I'm pressing much harder with my pencil now. And that created that part. Okay, so I'll show you how to shape, but you should be able to figure out your highlights from there. Alright, so putting in the headlights. One of the headlights was over here. It's almost like a weird little egg shape. Put that in. And it was behind it. So this interesting shape kind of stops right there. I'm going to move that so I have some space. And then the next one was fairly close to it, but just a little higher. Not by much. You want some space right here. I might even move that forward more. It's okay to erase because artists make mistakes all the time. You constantly have to go back and erase, right? I need to bring that up higher. There was some odd little shape right here, so I'll just put that in. There was the other side of the wheel over here, and there was actually an extra headlight right down here. And then this was part of the grill, because this is a classic car. Instead of having the grill, there was a grill down here, but there was also one up here. So I'm just putting those lines in. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and put this part in. And then what's interesting is here you're outlining where the white parts are, and then you don't shade it. And then you shade the other areas, and you use the same techniques that you did here. You start with that medium value, you go back and kind of erase it down to a 1 or 2, okay? And then you go and layer more values, lightly erase, use your paintbrush, do darker lines, and you're using that same concept in here. You're just building those layers slowly. I added this in because this was the car parked next to it, but as a background I thought it kind of made sense. It was nice to have kind of these stripy chrome shiny colors here to contrast what happened here. So as a composition it works to kind of just zoom in on that part right there. Okay. Doing this headlight here, it's really just line work. Once you put the lines in, they're slightly curved. I had to go back and erase part of the middle and then shade a little more to finish. This is a sketchbook assignment. It's just to get the basic idea of how to deal with highlights and shadows and building values. If you want to take it further and draw the whole thing that you see here and all these super little details and the tree and all that, you can. I was kind of, for a sketchbook assignment, I was sticking to kind of a more abstract version of it, which when we get to the comic book styles, you're going to see that the highlights and shadows are also done in kind of an abstract way. All right, thank you and good luck.